This is a Momentum Media production.
Welcome to the Smart Property Investment Show, the podcast by investors for investors.
Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of the Smart Property Investment Show. I'm your host for this installment, Juliette Helmke. I'm part of the team that brings you all the news over on SPI. Today, we are thrilled to be welcoming onto the podcast one of the property industry's biggest leaders, Kelly Ryan, CEO of the Real Estate Institute of Victoria, who stepped into that job in just the past few months. We'll be talking about what she's discovered as she's been getting comfortable in the big job and some of the things that they're doing over at the REIV to help with the cost of compliance that we know has been a challenge for investors. Kelly, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Juliette.
How long have you been in the job now?
I've just ticked over 3 months, so still very new.
Wonderful. Yeah, but that's, I think, a pretty significant sort of milestone. The 3 months, it's not your first week, it's not your first month. You've been really getting into it. It's a quarter of the year after all. So what has been your initial focus in these first couple months?
Yeah, like I think many leaders when they step into an organisation, the first 90 days usually is pretty structured. So for me, it's literally just been about meeting as many people as I can. So firstly, getting to know the staff inside REIV, so having one-on-one meetings with them, having one-on-one meetings with each of the board members, and then trying to have as many one-on-one meetings with our industry stakeholders. So they're our agencies, our franchise heads, and any agent in particular as well that I've, taken the opportunity to reach out to, and some past presidents along the way. So it's all been a matter of just gathering as many insights as I can at this particular point.
That sounds like actually quite an enjoyable way to get into things, having lots of interesting conversations, I'm sure, with lots of interesting people in the industry.
Yeah, it has. It always provides really great insight, which for me, not coming from the real estate industry previously, just helps hone where I think we need to focus our attention as quick as possible. So the one thing I've certainly found is everyone's been incredibly welcoming. Everyone has a real passion for the industry, which is fabulous, and everyone wants nothing but the best for the industry. So when you've got that to work with, it's a pretty solid base. And now we just need to build a strategy from an organisational point of view that supports what our members need.
Absolutely. And look, it is so interesting because, as you mentioned, you don't come from a real estate background into this. You come from a sporting background, which I think is so cool. I love to see when we have people who come in bringing ideas from all these different sectors, across the country. And I'd love to hear if you have any thoughts about what sort of the sporting side of things equips you to be able to bring into real estate.
Well, a lot of similarities. So sport, highly emotional, and a lot of emotions at play. So no different to real estate. Selling or buying a property is possibly one of the biggest decisions you can ever make. So there's a lot of emotion that comes with that. So that's hugely similar. A lot of interest on both of those spaces as well. So you don't have to go far to have someone want to stop and have a conversation around sport. And it's not too dissimilar around real estate as well, especially given the state of the market and some of the conversations and commentary happening. It's a highly topical area right now. But I think the one thing that sport definitely structures you for is a lot of hard work and resilience. And that's something that I've certainly learned a lot about. And I think that, resilience in particular is an incredible skill that you need to have in any leadership opportunity. So I think that puts me in good stead for what we're facing here at REIV.
I think that's so true. And it's very interesting as you sort of make your way around some of the industry conferences that we have here. You'll so often see sporting leaders come to talk to the real estate industry about a range of different things. One of those in particular is sort of like the mindset and approaching what is a very competitive industry and how to sort of go into that, protecting yourself, protecting your mental health, but being able to be in a competitive headspace sort of from day to day. You're competing on listings. You're trying to put yourself forward, as well as, I think, not letting that sort of like competitiveness impose too much or sort of change your personality or get in the way of the fact that you're also trying to be a really good community member. You're ultimately there to help people, like sport to bring joy. As you mentioned, houses, to sort of provide this kind of fundamental need for people. So I think it's really interesting to see some of those crossovers there. Do you feel like some of the conversations, have you been almost having a bit of deja vu at times where you're like, oh, this is something we talk about in the sporting industry, which is about approach to work and mental health?
Yeah, absolutely, which is why it's probably been a pretty seamless transition from my perspective, because you are dealing in a high stakes game, be it in sport or be it in real estate, because yes, real estate is enormously competitive and, again, requires a huge amount of effort and energy. It's a 7-day a week industry. Sports a 7-day a week industry. It's highly scrutinized. It's a highly political space, as, both of them are in that regard as well. That emotional and mental well-being is something that is critical. And I think at least now we're having conversations around that. I think there's always been a bit of a persona that sporting stars or even business leaders should have a different level of mental capacity, but the truth is people don't, people are people. So
we're all human, right?
we're all human and we absolutely make mistakes and we learn from them. And sometimes, they play out publicly and sometimes they don't. But having mental resilience, again, is hugely important in both sides of things. So definitely a huge amount of similarities, which is good. Makes me feel at home, doesn't make me feel like a total outsider.
Absolutely.
And at the end of the day, working inside Real Estate Institute of Victoria, it is a business and we have to run like a business. We're a member organisation. Majority of sporting clubs are member organisations. So being able to bring a mentality that sporting organisations do so well from a membership perspective into our space, I think, is something that I'm really excited to glean some of those insights from my past and put them into practice here.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's so interesting. We talk about sort of those the similarities between the two things. Part of that is also this kind of roller coaster ride that you can go through when you're in either sporting or in real estate. That's very much about the market on the real estate side of things, while on the sporting side of things, it's, I suppose, whether the team is winning or losing, or you're having a good season or a bad season. The market is something we want to get into to talk about what's happening in Victoria, and we will be doing that after a quick break. We'll be back again shortly with more from Kelly Ryan of the Real Estate Institute of Victoria.
Imagine being rushed to hospital.
Yep.
And your life changing in an instant. Imagine going through hundreds of tests and 46 weeks of chemo. Now imagine you're a child. That's why Starlight exists. To bring happiness to seriously ill children. Please donate at starlight.org.au.
Welcome back to this episode of Secrets of the Top 100 Agents, and I'm joined by Kelly Ryan, CEO of the Real Estate Institute of Victoria. Now, Kelly, before the break, we were talking about your very interesting background in sporting and getting to know the real estate industry at a time, in fact, that is sort of quite interesting for Australia. We have been through quite a lot in the past couple of years, which you would have been very acutely aware of because the entire nation is acutely aware of this. So not something new that you sort of had to acclimate to getting into it, but certainly viewing it probably from a new perspective now that you're a professional in the industry. So what we've kind of seen recently from the Victorian government, as we've seen from many state and territory governments, is them releasing some plans to talk about how they're going to approach supply in the future, because as we know, across the country, we have some massive supply issues across the housing spectrum in sales, rental, affordable, and social. So tell us a little bit about what we saw from the Victorian government at the start of the month when they revealed its sort of big ideas, they're calling it, in the new plan for Victoria that really is about how the state is going to be approaching housing in the future. What did they say they wanted to do?
What we saw predominantly come out of that piece of work that ultimately fled into a consultation period, which we've absolutely taken advantage of and provided our feedback, was this notion around having high density spaces, not necessarily within the city, but in the outer ring of the city, if you like. So starting to move towards, high-rise apartments, smaller blocks, if you like, but within an inner catchment of the city, and less reliance on this green space that Melbourne, certainly in particular, has seen a huge surgence of over the last 15, 20 years in the outer rings of Melbourne. So noting that infrastructure has really struggled to keep up with building in the outer spaces, more infrastructure organically exists as it is in the middle ring. So that's the kind of the focus of what the government's trying to do now, is to populate some of those areas the most, which We don't disagree with that approach, but I think the critical challenge here is that that's one model that will suit one or two cohorts. But what we know through people's property journeys is that there's different stages, you need different housing needs. So we still need to be able to encourage more things, more investment, and more strategies to make sure that we're encapsulating the quantum of the housing needs and individuals' needs, not just a smaller subsection, which typically high-rise apartments will only ever attract a certain cohort.
So what does that look like if we are actually serving everybody's needs as opposed to the people for whom high-rise living, apartment dwelling might make sense?
Yeah, well, I think what we need to do is we need to use our current supply a lot better than we currently do. So some of the initiatives that were flagged in the past, continuing to still have conversations with, and came up actually in the last few days again, is some stamp duty incentives and things like that, which we think are still incredibly important. So higher incentives for first home buyers we think is critical. But we also talk about last home buyers. So the retired couple that's still living in a 4-bedroom home in a great suburb that's close to schools. That's the type of home that we'd love to see going to a first home buyer or a family, resizing due to their family needs. They will utilise that housing stock a lot better than a retired couple living in a 4-bedroom house who might be then right to go into one of these apartment zones in the outer ring. So using your current stock, we think there needs to be more incentives to have people shift around in that regard as one of the critical measures to work in parallel with some of the development needs that they've outlined.
Do you think that those last home buyers or, kind of what we're talking about is the retirement or post-retirement age Australians, do you think that they're getting enough attention in this housing equation? Because we certainly talk a lot about first home buyers, and that makes so much sense. That effort to get onto the property ladder is a massive one, and it can be very discouraging for people when we have big changes in the real estate industry as we have. But there is also that big piece of trying to retire. I mean, that is sort of what we talk about when we talk about trying to get onto the property ladder, because it's seen as such an important part of those retirement plans for Australians, having that equity in property. But it almost seems like we're perhaps not sort of having the conversation around what the needs are when you get to that point.
Yeah, absolutely right. And we talk about the demographics of, Victoria and Australia as well, is we are an aging population. Our boomers do make up a considerable amount of our population. So we do spend a lot of time talking about the first home buyers, and, we still advocate for them needing support. However, one of the biggest blockers to a retired couple wanting to move is just that cost. They've if they have retired, then they're, living off either their own superannuation or government support. And that cost of stamp duty to relocate is a considerable amount of money that you're never going to realise, back the other way. Now, ultimately, hopefully they have bought well and they're, sitting on a, good return and a gain at the end of that. But at the same time, it is still a really big cost that is distracting people from making the decision. So I think anything we can do at multiple stages of the life cycle, it's not just first home, it's not just end, but again, encouraging people to right-size their housing needs. I think a lot of it does come down to actually being really smart and savvy and bringing in the stamp duty concessions and incentives at periods like we're facing now, which we are facing a housing shortage and we are facing financial challenges and cost of living supply. These are the times where you need your governments to step in and help provoke the necessary change to help deliver what you need to deliver in another 5-10 years' time.
It's so true. And that turnover is so important to the health of a well-functioning real estate market. Something we're going to jump into once more once we return from a quick break. Stay with us. Welcome back to this episode of Secrets of the Top 100 Agents, where I'm speaking with Kelly Ryan, CEO of the Real Estate Institute of Victoria. And before the break, we were talking about the healthy turnover that is needed in a market to bring vitality to it, to bring the stock for first home buyers, the options for people at retirement age, and just the possibilities for everybody in between. Now, Kelly, let's talk a little bit about what's happening in the market in Victoria at the moment, because as we have seen, in some ways it's slipped into a bit of a different speed as some of the other sort of major cities. So Melbourne operating not quite the same level of a price differentiation as we're potentially seeing happen in Sydney, in Brisbane, certainly over in Perth. We know they are at a turbocharged speed. So tell us about what's happening there and what you think might be the cause of some of these sort of market drivers.
Yeah, so we've got a few things happening. Is one, we've got a huge amount of supply issues from a renter perspective, and I think that's creating a fair amount of stalemate in the current market. So at the moment, we do have a rental shortage, if you like, in terms of the supply that we have, which is driving increases in rents. And what that's also doing is now we're seeing a lot of investors sell their properties. So we've got a lot of properties sitting on the market, and last weekend was our second highest auction weekends for the year so far. So we've got a lot of supply in the selling space, less so from a buyer's perspective. So we're still only seeing clearance rates, between 60 and 70% of those properties. And a large portion of those are attributable to investors leaving the market. So kind of got this dynamic, which is quite interesting to see how it's playing out, because from a rental perspective, investors are being hit with significant amounts of compliance demands. So more than ever before, compliance has lifted. So the chances of being non-compliant are seemingly higher. The government set up a rental task force to fine any landlords and agencies that are not compliant. So that's a bit of a disincentive to have a property. New minimum standards are slated to come in at the end of next year. So there's more cost that's going to be laid on the investor, and then more compliance, and then obviously dealing with the land tax increases, which again is something that's a COVID recovery debt tax, and it's been clearly labelled as that. So it's an additional cost that investors didn't have before. And now, we've got the mortgage increases as well, which, we know is not necessarily an individual state impact, but it's whole of country, and that's what's being felt here in Victoria. So really tough times at the moment for investors, really tough times therefore for renters, and a little bit tougher as well if you're also trying to sell your property right now, because whilst they are moving, they're probably not moving at the rate or the price that, I know a number of vendors would happily want to realise.
In terms of that compliance, it is a lot to navigate if you are a property owner and a landlord, or potentially even a property manager as well. Though, of course, it is obviously your professional obligation to stay on top of that compliance. But what are you seeing from the industry, and sort of what is your plan in the future to be supporting people as these, it almost seems like the ever shifting ground of compliance at times. How are you committing to sort of help people through these big changes that have taken place and are coming sort of in future?
Yeah, well, our role as an institute is make sure we can make our members as informed as possible. So any insight we can give them in terms of what's coming down the line, to make them aware of that. We involve our membership base in consultation. So the minute government opens up for consultation on any necessary changes or thoughts around change, we bring our membership base into that to provide input into that. So when we're providing feedback back to the government, we know it's reflective of what our members need and what our members are hearing and seeing from being on the coalface on a daily basis. So we try and use that lens just in terms of an education point of view, and we try and take all that data and insight back to the government to try and have a really educated conversation, because one of our main goals is to make sure that we do have a healthy state that has a robust housing supply, has great demand, and that's what certainly drives the economy. And what we're also trying to do at the moment is also look after our people who, again, are on the coalface. Talk about our property managers. Unfortunately, we've got an exodus of property managers from our industry at the moment, which is not helping when there's this need to again have property managers that are well informed, well educated. They're the go-to for investors or for tenants when anything is starting to not go right. So they're critical to the success and the health of our industry. But because of the amount of pressure that notably falls on them, we're seeing a mass exodus. And due to the training requirements in Victoria, you can't start as a property manager until you've completed a relatively robust education process, which is also a deterrent to bringing new people in. So we're trying to work with the government around allowing people to start working in the industry whilst they're undergoing their education and training requirements. So they learn on the job, and we can get people back into our industry and attract people from other industries to help support where, again, what the state is facing from a housing issue, supply and compliance component at the moment.
Absolutely, because as we talk about so often here at RB, they are absolutely vital parts of the equation in a healthy housing system. And as we know, we make no bones about it. Sometimes they just do not get the attention and the credit that they deserve. So we're all about continuing those conversations about how we support people in property management, to really thrive and be in those careers sort of long term and find them rewarding careers without, look, every job has its pressures, but without the sort of pressures that we've seen driving people out of the industry. So be really interesting to see what you can achieve as you continue to work with government on incentivizing that. Now, just for, a little bit of looking ahead, because we like to leave things talking about future potential and what could be hopefully happening as we move forward into the sort of warmer months. Kelly, tell us about some of the indicators that you would like to see in Victoria to indicate that, we've talked about some of the challenges there, that things are moving potentially in the right direction sort of by the end of the year.
Yeah, first and foremost, we'd love to see some relief for our rental providers. I think that is absolutely going to be critical to, again, a healthy housing supply in the state of Victoria. So we'd like to see some of the intended compliance components that are coming down the line. We'd like to see them delayed, for instance. So it's not another thing that we have to deal with. We can slow down the rate of our rental providers leaving the market. We think that will be ultimately a really positive result for the whole state. We don't want to get to a position where we just don't have enough stock for our renters, and people renting is becoming more and more prevalent than it ever has been before. So we want to focus on that and make sure that we can support our rental investors to stay in the market. From a selling and buying perspective, I think it's going to come down to a certain degree around having some interest rate relief, which is, I think, going to be a little bit tough to see that between now and the end of the year. But I think that moment when that does happen, and it will happen, will absolutely swing some positivity back into the market and give everybody a sense that, okay, things are on the improve. At the moment, though, we're still seeing great houses hit the market. We're seeing, there's great supply. So means it is a great opportunity for people to buy at this particular time of year. And obviously in spring, we're going to see an influx of properties hit the market, which we have. And last weekend, our second highest weekend for the year, highlighted that spring is still a really positive period of time for people to sell. And I think we'll see that continue through until the later parts of this year as well. So still always great opportunities and buying conditions. It's always someone that, again, will need a house for different reasons. And that's what we still expect to see. So prices might not be increasing in terms of capital value as much right now, but we still see that as a really strong opportunity for buyers.
Absolutely. And we will be paying attention to all of that over on REB and bringing the news to our readers and our listeners. And, however you get your content, obviously we do lots of various things, podcasts, audio, video, we're across it all. Kelly, thank you so much for your time today. You've provided some really wonderful insight for our listeners about the state of things in Victoria and your plans for the future at REIV. I'm sure it's provided a lot of food for thought. So we just so appreciate you taking the time to come on and speak with us.
That's been great. Thanks for having me, Juliet.
Thank you. That's the end of our show today. If you enjoyed this episode, please like or review us on whatever platform you are using to listen in on. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out at editor@smartpropertyinvestment.com.au. Stay up to date with the latest on our website and subscribe at smartpropertyinvestment.com.au. And be sure to check us out on social media, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and X. Thanks for listening. We'll be back soon with another episode of the Smart Property Investment Show. Until then, goodbye.
The information featured in this podcast is general in nature and does not take into consideration your financial situation or individual needs and should not be relied upon. Before making any investment, insurance, tax, property, or financial planning decision, you should consult a licensed professional who can advise whether your decision is appropriate for you. Guests appearing on this podcast may have a commercial relationship with the companies mentioned.
Feeling trapped by rising interest payments? Escape from mortgage prison with expert refinancing assistance from Finny. We have helped hundreds of borrowers break free from higher loan repayments by finding a more suitable loan. Our expert team can quickly assess your situation, and if there's a better lender available, we'll find it fast. Don't delay. Call today. Speak to a Finny mortgage specialist on 02 8866 2444 or visit our website at www.finny.com.au.